this is Spectra. It's a multi-effect patch centered around the idea of a polyphonic resonator in the style of a Menqui wingy or maybe more like a mutable instruments rings. Um, that's meant for processing audio rather than generating it on its own. So it uses a slightly different method of creating resonators than what I've used in the past using band passes and that sort of thing. Here we have parametric filters run in series, uh, very resonant parametric filters run in series, and then the output of that series of filters is added to an inverted copy of the input. And what happens there is that the inverted copy will cancel out everything that passes through the filters that is consistent with the original copy, leaving only these peaks behind, these deviations from the original signal. And I like the sound of it. It sounds pretty good, I think. But that's sort of the method of creating a resonator used here. If you're interested or want to try it on your own. The way that they're controlled, there are 6 different filters, and they can be spread out using this spread control. I'm using a MIDI keyboard. The MIDI keyboard is routed to each of these attenuverters, which also can be used for CV. The patch uses MIDI or CV, whatever's most convenient for you. I sort of designed it with CV in mind, but I wanted to leave that option open. I'm going to turn that down right now so we can hear how these controls work without some sort of outside interference. So we spread that out some more. We get those peaks being spread out more. They're quantized. There are 5 options for the quantizer: major and minor, and major pentatonic and minor pentatonic. And then there's also a fifths option, which will quantize everything to octaves and fifths. So depending on which quantizer you use, the spread control will function slightly differently. You can select the key for the quantizer here. It only works through the first octave on its control. It's really what it is a rescaled value module. So anything above G sharp 1 will read as G sharp 1. But if you use note values between A0 and G sharp 1, it'll know that you want C sharp as the key. Then there's a pitch control. If there's no MIDI coming in or no CV coming in, then you can use this to set a pitch. But if there is MIDI or CV coming in, you can use it to transpose or offset the sort of bass frequency of the filters. There's what I call a pre-delay section, because that's how I initially designed it. I initially thought of this as like a fully wet reverb thing. And you can use it that way. It sounds very nice, I think. But I realized as I worked on it some more that some versatility might be welcome. So there's a pre-delay section. We can just get rid of the pre-delay, and then we don't have this or we can add some pre-delay without any feedback. It goes up to a second long. You can add some feedback. And the pitch of the incoming audio will somewhat affect the filters because they'll pick up on different frequencies, but also the bass frequency is going to do a lot to sort of set the tonality of what's going on. The filter section involves gain and Q. So the gain is sort of like an intensity control. If you're clipping on the input, you might adjust that. You can also send the gain into the negative, and this is kind of interesting because then the frequencies aren't accented, they're subtracted from the original signal, so it becomes kind of a type of EQ, and you can affect the Q There's some subtle and not so subtle ways you can use the negative gain. The Q has an interesting effect. As you bring it below a certain amount, what happens is that those peaks become less narrow. They start spreading out. And that means that more gain builds up at different frequency bands. You might have heard a little bit of distortion when the spread control was set all the way to 0, because then again you have all of the frequency bands sort of stacking up on top of one another. At first I thought this was like a bug and I was going to try and figure out a way to avoid it, but I actually think it's a feature now, so you can use this. It's going to get louder in a second, just so you know. You can use this to create a distortion. Let's bring the filter gain down a little bit. So that's I think an interesting option, especially because the gain and the filter Q or resonance are controllable via CV. So you can have sounds that begin in this sort of melodious space, sort of descend into crunchier sounds and really oscillate between those two. And I actually think it's sort of like a secret weapon of this patch. I also think the distortion to me sounds, if not great, then at least interesting. It's a very sort of biting distortion. And the filter gain and the spread control, all of those will have an effect on it because they're affecting the sort of intensity and the spread of the frequencies and all that sort of thing. So it becomes also something that sort of morphs with when you play with other controls. And we do have inputs, like I said, for the Q and for the filter gain, as well as the spread control. This one's for pitch on the CV. Then there's a reverb light at the output. Just like I said, I sort of imagine this as a resonant reverb sort of thing. And then there's dry and wet levels. And that's the patch. It's control-wise, I think it's pretty straightforward, but you can do a lot of interesting things with it. I'm going to do some more sound examples now. And let's see what it sounds like with some drums. Or a drum machine. I'm just using some audio coming in from my phone. I have a little program that lets me play around with samples. So